Zach, and this is one of my favorite stories from the Bible.
That's great, it starts with an earth.
First, let's go to the genealogy. Jacob, the main character in our story today, was the grandson of Abraham. And Abraham is really important because he is the place where most family trees in the Bible start. He matters because one time in a very romantic story, God woke Abraham up in the middle of the night, chainsawed a bunch of livestock in half, and promised Abraham that his descendants would be as numerous as the stars. It's a real John Cusack high-fidelity moment, except a little more metal. A reminder that in these videos, I'm not making anything up. This is all really in the Bible. Some hyperbole, sure, but this is all #facts. Now, Abraham and his wife Sarah have some fertility issues, and in an episode that reminds us that Bible characters are not necessarily role models, Abraham takes another wife, Hagar, and with her has a son called Ishmael. Of course, immediately after that, Sarah gets pregnant and they have a son called Isaac, and this leads to Abraham leaving Hagar and Ishmael to die by themselves in the desert. Again, Bible characters are not necessarily role models. Isaac goes on to have twins, Jacob and Esau. Esau was born first, and the Bible goes out of its way to tell us that he was a very, very hairy baby. Jacob comes out second. We don't know exactly how hairy he was, but the Bible did think it was important to tell us that when he was born, he was holding on to Esau's heel. They are wrestling from birth. This foreshadows their entire relationship. They fight. And eventually, Jacob gets the best of Esau because it turns out that Jacob is like the world's best or worst, depending on your perspective, used car salesman. He gets Esau to give him his birthright in exchange for a bowl of soup. Again, all facts, nothing but facts here. Isaac was not aware of this deal and probably would not have approved. And so on his deathbed, when it was time to confer the birthright, he called for Esau. And thanks to some scheming orchestrated by Jacob and his mother, Esau was unavailable. And by that time, Isaac was blind because he was, very old. And so Jacob covered himself in goat skin, pretended to be Esau, and again, for the second time, stole Esau's birthright. And he was able to do it because, remember, since birth, it was very well known that Esau was exceedingly hairy. Isaac asked for an ID, felt up a goat skin on Jacob's arm, and said, "Checks out." It turns out that Esau is not cool with this. And so Jacob takes what he can and he runs away. And he ends up in a foreign land and he strikes a deal with a guy named Laban to marry his younger daughter. Unfortunately, on the wedding night, Jacob maybe had a little too much to drink or just because heavy veils were in fashion at the time, but he wakes up the next morning to realize that he has married the wrong daughter. He has married the older daughter. And so it turns out that Jacob is going to have to spend a few more years working for Laban before he can earn the right to marry the daughter that he thought he was going to get to marry in the first place. And Jacob, who is a schemer and a conniver, here for the first time is outfoxed. Jacob is not on board with this plan. And so in the middle of the night, he takes both daughters, all of his maidservants, all 10 of the children he's had time to create, and all of the sheep he can take with him, and runs away from Laban. Now, Jacob has nowhere to go. His only hope is to go back to Esau and pray that Esau will forgive him for financially ruining him twice. Along the way, they come to a river. And Jacob sends all of the sheep and all of his sons and all of the maidservants and all of his wives over to the other side of the river. But Jacob stays on the near side of the river and he makes camp there all by himself. Now you might hear this detail of the story as a sign of Jacob's care for the caravan, that he wanted to make sure that all of his wives and children and maidservants and livestock got across the river first. Don't. You see, Jacob had not sent nor received any ravens from his brother Esau. The safe assumption would be that Esau would want to kill him. He would still be very upset. And so Jacob's logic, being at the back of the caravan, staying on the far side of the river, is that if Esau saw him coming from far away, Esau would tire himself out by killing the sheep and the sons and the maidservants and the wives, that by the time he got all the way to the end of the line, by the time he got to Jacob, he'd be more willing to, take a breather and talk things out. Jacob is by himself on the river shore because he's trying to protect himself, but this too will not work out. In the middle of the night, Jacob is awoken by a mysterious visitor. Some people say it's an angel, and maybe it is, but the Hebrew isn't that specific. It literally says that another man came and they started wrestling. So this dude shows up in the middle of the night, and with no apparent exchange of words, they just go at it and start wrestling, and they wrestle all night long. It is a stalemate. There is no clear winner, though at some point in the night, the visitor lands a blow on Jacob's hip, which I suppose isn't technically below the belt, and it knocks Jacob's hip out of its socket. Now, I've had no formal medical training, nor have I ever had my hip knocked out of its socket, but I have to imagine that would be very painful. But Jacob is a fighter, and he wrestles right through it, again, all through the night. Now, if you're looking for some textual evidence as to the identity of the night visitor, might I suggest vampire? Because eventually the visitor tells Jacob that he's really got to get out of here because the sun's going to come up and I can't be here when the sun rises. So, vampire makes sense. Jacob says, I will not let you go unless you bless me. And the night visitor says, fine, what's your name? And he says, Jacob. And the night visitor says, you will no longer be called Jacob, but Israel, because you have wrestled with God and humans and have prevailed. It's a cool blessing, but Jacob is not done. What's your name? Jacob asks. The night visitor isn't exactly one for fair play. He refuses and he disappears, leaving Jacob to walk into the sunrise with a limp because of his hip. There is so much to love about this story. Mostly it's the first recorded evidence of Hulkamania running wild on someone, but the thing that I love most about it is the limp. This encounter is the pivotal point in Jacob's life. Before now, his life is nothing but conflict and division, but here everything changes. He'll go on to reconcile with Esau. He'll work for peace among his sons who take after his earlier self. In this story, Jacob the conniver becomes Jacob the reconciler. The mystery of Jacob and the faith is that walking with a limp, he is now stronger. His life is unequivocally better. The truth of life is that sooner or later our hips will be knocked out of their sockets. Life will give us a limp. But those limps are not signs of our failures. They are signs of our strength. Thanks for watching. I'm trying to do one of these every week through the summertime. Again, let me know in the comments if you have a Bible story you'd like me to talk about, and we'll see you next week.